represented, the Prime Minister feels. Well, this afternoon we saw it all in public when, goaded in the Commons, he more or less lost it with the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. The issue was the appointment of another senior ally, Matthew Doyle, to the House of Lords, despite his past friendship and support for a paedophile offender. And as you listen to this exchange and concentrate on the Prime Minister's voice at the end of it, remember that Davey is a man who in the past he has seemed to get on with very well, almost a friend.
Mr. Speaker, to appoint one paedophile supporter cannot be excused as misfortune. To appoint two shows a catastrophic lack of judgment. The Right Honourable Gentleman once told this House that when a Prime Minister refuses to take responsibility, and I quote, "It only serves to convince people that things cannot get better, that governments cannot improve people's lives, and that progress is not possible because politics does not work." Does he still agree with himself? And does he share my fear that is exactly what is happening now?
Minister.
People in this country, millions of people, have been let down for years and years and years. And one of the reasons was austerity, which his party supported. He should take accountability and take responsibility for what he has inflicted on this country.
This was not a good day for Keir Starmer. I mean, it could have been worse. The leader of the opposition didn't bring up the call for Starmer to resign from the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Anna Sarwar. She didn't even mention the words Wes or streeting, both of which were sitting along the bench from Starmer. But she did home in on the Prime Minister's defence for giving Doyle a job for life, which was that he was misled. But the story was hardly a secret.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister pretends not to know about Matthew Doyle. It was on the front page of the Sunday Times. He cannot explain why he gave this man a peerage, and I think they should be wondering why they're still cheering for him after that.
Labour MPs apparently gave Starmer an uproariously loyal reception at their private meeting on Monday, as any plot against him was unravelling. But watching from the chamber today, I didn't think the mood on the Labour benches was exactly enthusiastic. It was more watching, wondering and waiting. The truth is, nobody is yet prepared to publicly challenge him for the leadership. I began by talking tonight about the Prime Minister's mood. That's not a gossip thing. It is crucial. Because he is angry and he wants to fight, the prospect of a bloody contest before a high-stakes by-election and then the May elections is spooking many of his own backbenchers. So, a bad day in the Commons with more questions about his judgment, but overall he is stronger this week. Next week, Parliament takes a half-term break, and we assume everybody cools down, and so on it goes. But it can't be more of the same. As Labour's popularity continues to tank, something has to change. If it's not the Prime Minister, what is it? And that question about what needs to change is what I asked the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, a few moments ago.
Look, I don't think the Prime Minister should change. I made that clear on Monday with the rest of the Cabinet. I think he was elected to do a job, and he's right to take that responsibility seriously and deliver the change that the country needs. But if the Epstein files showed us anything, it's that they laid bare the fact that there is a group of very powerful, very wealthy men who run systems and the system in their own interests. They look after each other and they screw everybody else. And women and girls have been the main victims of that through the association with Jeffrey Epstein. But actually out there in the country are a whole lot of people who've been telling us for years that the system is rigged against them. It doesn't work in their interests. It works in the interests of other people. And we were elected on a mandate to change that. So we're going to have to raise our level of ambition, and we're going to have to really start acting like a Labour government that is bold and is radical and is prepared to tilt the balance of power in favour of ordinary people in this country.
You are talking really about the culture in Downing Street.
I'm talking about two things. I'm talking, first of all, about not just small change and incremental change, but really big change that actually changes people's lives. So whether it's the work that we've already done on things like renationalising the railways so that people come before profit, whether it's the work that I've been doing on the football regulator to put fans back at the heart of the game and stop wealthy and powerful people collapsing football clubs all over the country, we need more of this.
Do you think you can do more about housing? Because there's an entire generation that can't find anywhere decent, affordable to live.
Yeah, I absolutely do. We promised to build 1.5 million new homes. They've got to be affordable homes. They've got to be the right homes in the right communities. And we've got to make sure that we deliver on that promise, as well as the big changes that we're making, ending that feudal system of leasehold that really does tilt the balance of power away from ordinary people. You buy your home, you should own it. And too many people have been sold a lie. So these are all the things that we need to really step up and make sure we deliver on.
Do you think in the public mind you haven't really been a proper Labour government up till now?
So I think we have come in at a time when not just the economy but public service as well were on their knees. And after all those years of Conservative government, one of the biggest things that was completely broken was people's faith in politics or government to make changes in their lives. Now, we had to fix all of that, but I think as a consequence of that, we have been behaving more like a government of national emergency than a Labour government. We need to start wearing our values on our sleeve and show that we've got the same passion for our people and our communities as they have, and that we're prepared to stand up for them in any fight that they choose to fight and make sure that they win.
And to do that, you need the very best people around you. You've told me in the past that you would like to see Andy Burnham back in the House of Commons. Is that still the case?
Well, look, I'm not prescriptive about what Andy Burnham should be doing. It's up to him what he wants to do.
I'm not saying for a leadership challenge. I'm just saying back at the centre.
No, but I mean, look, I served alongside him in Parliament for 7 years. He was my neighbouring MP in Lee, and he was outstanding. He's been outstanding as the Mayor of Greater Manchester. He's a friend of mine, and of course I'll support him in whatever he wants to do. Whatever team he chooses to play on, whether it's the parliamentary team or the mayoral team, he is an enormous asset to our party and movement. And we've had this culture for too long, not just in the Labour Party, but across politics, where, you know, briefings and attacking one another and factionalism and infighting. And that is one of the main things that really does need to change.
Because an awful lot of what you've just been saying about nationalisation and Labour wearing its heart on its sleeve and all of that is exactly what he was saying yesterday.
Well, it's not a surprise, is it? Because he and I come from a similar part of the world. Wigan and Lee are two neighbouring towns next door to one another, where people really have been buffeted by the headwinds of globalisation, by systems that favour the wealthy and powerful and work against their interests. And whether it's housing, taxation, energy, water, all of these things, people look at them and think these work against me, not for me, and they don't help me to live a better life where I know that the future on offer for my kids is going to be better than the one that I had. So it's not a surprise that you hear the same sort of thing from myself and Andy Burnham. But actually, you know, having had these conversations with the Prime Minister, I think you'll hear a lot more of this from the Prime Minister as well.
Well, I hope so. Let me ask you candidly about the boys' club, because you have been on the target of briefing. We both know that. Do you think that the sort of macho element of Number 10 has been a problem in the last 18 months?
So I think that it's a problem in politics, and I think it's a problem in the Labour Party. I think it's been a problem in the Labour Party over the 16 years that I've been a member of Parliament. And I think it's not just about the way in which women are routinely briefed against, and I've been one of them. It's also about the way Northerners are treated. You know, one of the things
You've
that
been
I've
one
had
of them too.
I mean, one of the things I've had to put up with is these constant briefings about, you know, you're never in the office, you're lazy. Because, frankly, I believe that if you want to govern this country, you do actually have to like it and you have to spend time in it. And I think all of us in the North feel that real sneering towards us as a consequence. Yes, I believe that has to change. And yes, I believe that change has to be led from the top. I think the Prime Minister has two very good women at the helm at the moment who really understand that and will help him to deliver on that promise. And I do think he cares about it. I'll just say this, Andrew. First time I ever met him was when I was in my early 20s working with trafficked women and girls, and I went to see him as the Director of Public Prosecutions because too often those girls were being picked up in cannabis factories and nail bars and treated as perpetrators rather than victims. He overruled his civil service team and made sure that that changed. So I do believe genuinely that he cares about this and he shares those values, but we've all got to step up and show that leadership.
Have you been able to have a conversation with him about an excessively macho, excessively boys' club atmosphere around him?
I have, I've had those conversations with him a number of times. I had them with previous Labour leaders as well. I had them with Jeremy Corbyn and I had them with Ed Miliband. And I've had them with the Prime Minister and I've had them recently because, as you know, today the Women's Parliamentary Party is meeting with the Prime Minister and they feel very strongly, as do I, that more needs to be done. Now, having spoken to the Prime Minister about that this week, I know that he agrees with that, and now we've got to make sure that we make that change.
Talking about that culture, let me ask you directly about Matthew Doyle, who's gone to the House of Lords. The Prime Minister was challenged in the Commons today and said that he had been misled by Mr. Doyle before he became Lord Doyle. And yet this is very strange because the whole story was on the front page of the Sunday Times where every literate person in this country was able to pick it up.
Yep.
And it's hard to understand the lack of curiosity. Do you think that Matthew Doyle should be in the House of Lords?
So, no, I don't. And I think if we had known, I mean, I wasn't involved in the process, but I think if the Prime Minister had known what later came out in the Sunday Times, he wouldn't have put him forwards. We've got an investigation going on at the moment and the Prime Minister has said that he will strengthen the vetting procedures. I know that people have questions to answer about what questions that they're asking, rightly, about what happened in that period between the Prime Minister putting Matthew Doyle forward for a peerage, the story appearing in the Sunday Times, and then the peerage being confirmed. My understanding is that there is currently no precedent for withdrawing a peerage once it's been put forward and gone through the vetting process. If there isn't, then that obviously has to change. There are also, I understand, questions about, given that this was in the Sunday Times, why wasn't action taken sooner? The Prime Minister has looked into this personally. He said he wants that to change. He wants the vetting processes to be strengthened, and that there is this inquiry going on in the Labour Party as well to find out how that was able to come to pass.
Did you say to the Prime Minister that Morgan McSweeney should stand down?
I didn't. No, I didn't. And, you know, I've always taken the view, and particularly as somebody who was in the leadership race as a competitor that the Prime Minister won, that he has to appoint his own team and he has to be able to succeed on his own terms, and I'm there to help him.
There's been one other significant development, I think, this afternoon, which is that the former Labour leader and Prime Minister Gordon Brown has intervened, saying that Britain has been much more involved in the trafficking of young women and girls than has been previously understood. A lot of it happened through Stansted Airport, and they were given visas in this country, allowing them to be trafficked to Epstein's Island. And he has said the Metropolitan Police must investigate that, and they should investigate Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Do you agree?
I think we need to leave no stone unturned in ending a system that allowed for the systematic abuse and rape and trafficking of women and girls. This is still going on, not just in this country, but across the world. Successive Prime Ministers have tried to do something about it, notably Theresa May, who really did show serious leadership on this. But have we done enough? Absolutely no, we haven't.
And so we were talking earlier on about what Keir Starmer could do to, as it were, show that he had the right values and so on. Would you like to see him lead an international drive for a proper investigation, a proper international oversight of the trafficking of women and girls around the world?
Well, look, I think we do need to step up and show the level of ambition that existed briefly when Theresa May was Prime Minister. But I also think that that is not the whole part of the story, because actually, in the end, what is this all about? It's about power. It's about who holds it and how they use it and how it's held to account, and who is prepared to call out this sort of thing when they see it. And that's why the culture of how we do our politics really matters, and who is heard matters. And that is why the Cabinet met this week to discuss that. That is why the Prime Minister is currently in with the Women's Parliamentary Labour Party talking about it. And that is what we have to go and create out in the country, so that ordinary people hold power in this country and can hold those of us in positions of responsibility properly to account.
As Margaret Atwood said, politics is who does what to whom. Lisa Nandy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to revisit that astonishing intervention from Gordon Brown, calling for the police to investigate Andrew Mountbatten Windsor for allegations he denies, with the deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper, in just a few minutes. But you're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:16.
LBC app.
6:18. The former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has made a very powerful intervention in the Epstein scandal. Writing for the New Statesman, he calls on British police to interview Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, including over the use of Stansted Airport to traffic young girls and people here who helped them get visas for the United States and therefore for Epstein's Island. Brown says that what he's discovered in the files has shocked me to the core, and he demands an in-depth police investigation. That's quite something. Let's hear now from Daisy Cooper, the Deputy Liberal Democrat leader. I began, however, with that tetchy exchange I mentioned between the Prime Minister and the Lib Dem leader himself this afternoon.
I think Ed Davey touched a nerve, and that's what Ed said to the Prime Minister. I think Ed was absolutely right to highlight to the Prime Minister his own catastrophic failure in judgment. And many people have been asking about the Prime Minister's judgment. You know, he relies a lot on his background as a prosecutor, where it is your job to look at evidence, to question everything, and to be a details person. And it seems as though the one quality that he's been holding up has been found to be massively wanting in the last few weeks. So I think the Prime Minister's response, as I say, I think it just touched a nerve.
And he was challenged in the Commons over the fact that the Matthew Doyle connection with his former paedophile was on the front page of the Sunday Times. It was hardly a national secret.
Yeah, precisely. And so I think the Prime Minister still has questions to answer. You know, it's all very well for him to get ratty and sort of play the underdog and say he's going to come out fighting, but he still has to answer these questions. He still has to answer why he didn't know certain things. And, you know, I think there's still building pressure on the Prime Minister to publish all sorts of different pieces of advice that he received when he was making those decisions.
And Ed Davey quoted to him his own words in opposition about the wrongness of blaming your underlings, getting rid of people who serve you. And that seems to be what's going on in Number 10 at the moment. Do you think it's been a bit of a boys' club?
Well, look, I'm not in the government, but certainly I would respect the view of any female parliamentarian who points to examples of that. I mean, right across society, there are examples of boys' clubs, and politics is no different. It's been a fairly open secret that a lot of the people around Starmer have been men. And I do think there is something to be said for having women in the room, not just, you know, on a diversity basis, but when you have different points of view from people with different backgrounds, whether that's your gender, your socioeconomic background, or any other form of diversity, you make better decisions. And it's quite plausible, I think, from what I'm hearing Labour female MPs saying, that because there wasn't a woman in the room, somebody didn't highlight these things. It shouldn't take there to be a woman in the room, quite frankly. You know, he has relied on the fact that he is a prosecutor. He's used to looking at evidence and coming to conclusions. And it's a real shame that, you know, this has come up.
One of the former boys in the room, obviously, was the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who has made what I think is a pretty astonishing and powerful intervention today in the New Statesman, calling for a series of changes, but basically saying that the Metropolitan Police should now investigate Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and in particular look at the use of Stansted Airport as a hub through which girls were trafficked to Epstein.
I absolutely support that, and I think that's a very welcome suggestion from Gordon Brown. We Liberal Democrats have already called for a full public inquiry, a statutory inquiry into everything that has gone on, and increasingly it feels as though these revelations continue to come, and increasingly it feels like it probably has implicated a whole load of different agencies and a lot of different people, and there's clearly a lot to come out. But I think we do need a full public inquiry, and I think that no man or woman is above the law, including ex-princes.
And indeed, Mr. Brown says that the use of English as a foreign language, places and visas was part of the way that these girls were enabled to get to Epstein's Island in the first place. He clearly thinks there is a big British connection here that hasn't been properly looked at. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I think it definitely has to be investigated. No stone should be left unturned in terms of getting to the bottom of how extensive this network was. Clearly, these revelations are I mean, they're not only abhorrent and disgusting, it's actually quite hard to find the words in terms of the scale of what this the scale of the network and the scale of what may have gone on here. And it does sound from these revelations as though many different parts of the British state were involved, and every single bit of that has to be investigated.
It's been said that the entire royal family is contaminated by this scandal at the moment. Do you think it's time for the King to come out and make a statement in his own voice, or at least in his own words, about what's happened to his brother?
Well, the King is his own man, but I certainly think the British public would welcome hearing something from the King. He is his own man, but he's also, the head of state. He represents us in some way as well. That's right. Look, I think the King has already put out a statement, but I do think the British public would welcome hearing something from the King in his own voice, expressing solidarity with the victims of all of these horrific crimes, and to hear the sincerity in his voice, which I'm sure he would show that he is willing to cooperate with every investigation and every angle of every investigation. Whether people are monarchists or not, he is our King, and people, I think, probably would really welcome hearing from him.
Well said, Daisy Cooper. Thank you very much for coming in. And you may remember that Labour's leader in Scotland, Anas Sarwar, called at the beginning of the week for the Prime Minister to stand down. That's not going to make the campaign for Holyrood any easier. Can you imagine the two men standing together on a platform now? Mr. Sarwar said today they could. But there's a long history of tension between Labour in Scotland and Labour in London. I was joined a little earlier by Jack McConnell, Lord McConnell, the former First Minister of Scotland and as Scottish Labour leader, one of Mr. Sarwar's predecessors. What did he think about what Anas Sarwar had done on Monday?
Well, it was certainly brave and took some courage to see through, especially to almost pre-announce it and then go ahead, despite, I'm sure, dozens of messages saying, asking him not to. I think it's unclear yet exactly what the implications are, but it does seem to have been relatively maturely handled in terms of the relationship between him and the Prime Minister in the 48 hours since. I think it does show that he's his own man. I think Anas is, he's very clear. He's been around a while now, although he's a young man. He if he wants to be First Minister, he wants to be First Minister on his own terms. And he's very clear that that is not a substandard job. It's a huge job, and it's one that needs somebody who can fill the shoes. So I think he showed that on Monday, and I actually think probably over the next few months it will be seen to be a moment when he kind of came into his own after a couple of years when life has been dominated by UK politics, and that's, as I know, it can sometimes be hard to break through. So,
two-part question. Do you think he was right to say it, and do you think it might actually help him in the Holyrood elections in May?
Well, I've had a very different reaction from people who are what I would describe as within the political bubble, and those who are not. Those who are not have been broadly supportive. Those who are in the bubble think it was a bit of a mess. And that's because they take every minutiae and soak it up and pour it back out again. And I think the public probably just saw somebody speaking his mind. And on that, if this is what he believed, and he was no longer prepared to say that he thought the situation was savable, then it was right to say it. He should speak his mind. He should tell the truth. He's not anybody's poodle, and he certainly doesn't need permission from anybody. And if he genuinely believed that was the right thing to say, whether or not others maybe let him down on Monday afternoon, I think he should say the honest thing rather than the concocted thing.
Do you think, let's be clear, that Wes Streeting let him down?
Well, I would be very surprised if he had done that without some indication that there were others who were prepared to fall in behind over the course of the afternoon. And of course, absolutely nobody of any significance did. No. So I suspect that there were quite a number of people who let him down. I don't know that for certain. I haven't spoken to him. But if they did, they should be ashamed of themselves.
Jack, let me turn to why he said what he did, because I'm sure you've been hearing the kind of messages on the doorstep that people who are candidates in the Holyrood elections have been hearing from the Labour Party side. And for people who are not in Scotland, some understanding of the anger and the difficulty on the doorstep that Anas was replying to.
Well, the real anger is in frustration that the SNP were beaten in Scotland 18 months ago for two reasons. One was clearly that Labour, had run a good campaign and was dominating the agenda at a national level, and a change was about to happen. But the other reason was that by then the gloss really had, after 17 years, come off the SNP. The delivery in government was really poor, and all sorts of public services. The economy was very sluggish and certainly not serving the most vulnerable in Scotland. And politically, the way that Scotland was being governed had become a bit of a mess. The whole sideshow around Nicola Sturgeon and the finances of the SNP, the constant changes of First Minister, the underperformance of ministers, and the lack of accountability to Parliament really was taking its toll. And in the 18 months since, partly due to the difficulties in London for the new Labour government, the focus on that in Scotland has not been nearly as clear. And in recent weeks, we have seen proof that a hospital was opened too early and that people died as a result. We've seen the Scottish government spending ridiculous amounts of money trying to maintain the position that male sex offenders can go into women's prisons. And we've seen the Scottish government wasting a lot of legal fees trying to stop the Information Commissioner getting his hands on the paperwork from the Alex Salmond Nicola Sturgeon debacle. So alongside the issues of governance and so on in Scotland should be up front in this Scottish election, but they're not.
They're not. To jump into, and that is because of huge hostility to the London government and to Keir Starmer personally on the doorstep. You'd agree with that?
I think a bit of hostility and a bit of disappointment, a bit of both. So, and that is what the SNP would love is an election in May that is a referendum on the performance of the new Labour government in Whitehall and Westminster. So what Scotland needs is a referendum on the Scottish government, and I think that's what Anas is trying to ensure.
I'm sure that's right. So, Jack, you've been very eloquent about Anas Sarwar's right to say, in all honesty, what he thought. Can I ask you a subtly different question, which is, do you think he was right to call for the Prime Minister to go and be replaced?
Well, I think that is... I would only ever answer that question in the affirmative if others, and probably more than one other, was stepping up with the vision and the organisation and the discipline and the courage to show that they can fill the shoes more successfully. And I think that's the, to me, that's at least one of the main issues at the moment, which is that if you're going to change, you're going to make a change after everything that's happened, then somebody needs to step up and fill the shoes. And at the moment, quite clear, particularly from what happened on Monday, that the courage, the politics, the organisation that is required to become Prime Minister is not yet obvious in any of the potential contenders.
So if there was a big, bold contender who said, I would like to become Prime Minister, and you felt they had the credibility and the numbers and the agenda to do so, you would say it's time for a change?
I think we're getting pretty close to that situation. But in the absence of that person, the Prime Minister says he's got to fight on. Well, I will welcome what he does to show that he is the man for the job. But for the moment, I don't think anybody else has yet shown the courage or the politics, critically the politics and the organisation to fill the shoes.
Jack McGonnell, Lord McGonnell, it's been great to talk to you. Great to have you on the show. Thank you for being so frank. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. The United States Attorney General Pam Bondi clashed with lawmakers today as she was questioned over links to Jeffrey Epstein. We're going to get all the latest from our Washington correspondent in a few minutes. But the time now, 6:32, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
The Culture Secretary.
LBC.
6:35. I was saying a little bit earlier that I thought a lot of politics, which is now unfolding, is pretty personal. By that I mean that the temperament and the mood of the Prime Minister himself is an important fact in any struggle for the leadership looking ahead. So let's talk more about the man. I'm joined next by Claire Ainsley of the Progressive Policy Institute, formerly Keir Starmer's Director of Policy, who knows him pretty well, and our Deputy Political Editor, Aggie Chambray. Aggie, first of all, you have been hearing news of yet more tensions behind closed doors in the Labour Party.
Indeed, I have, Andrew. So I've been told about a reasonably fractious meeting yesterday with Scottish Labour MPs. This was an emergency meeting after that explosive press conference from Anas Sarwar where he called for Keir Starmer to resign. And the first order of business, I'm told, was for them to all simply agree a statement. Spoiler alert, they never agreed that statement because some wanted to back Anas Sarwar, others very much wanted to distance themselves from that. So in the end, Richard Baker, who's the chair of the group, actually just put out his own statement. But there was also some tense moments in there too. So one MP, Zabir Ahmed, raised comments made by other MPs, including Scottish Labour MP Joanna Baxter, who is, of course, in the meeting. She had accused Anas Sarwar of treachery in a closed-door meeting on Monday. So Zabir Ahmed brought up that, and he said, I'm the only ethnic minority MP in Scotland. We've got a real challenge. We're behind reform. He said, I'm actively considering if there's a place for me and my mixed-race kids in this country if reform win. You might disagree, he says, with what Anas said, but no one here doubts he's the best man for the job and he's fighting a huge battle on his own. He said using the word traitor is unedifying in any context.
So not surprising in a sense that Scottish Labour MPs are concerned about which side to go for. Do they back Keir Starmer or do they Anas? I really get that. But there's also been a very important meeting, I think, today of the female Labour MPs right across the UK.
Indeed, extremely well-attended Women's Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, I know, because, Andrew, as always, I was sat outside with my ear to the door.
Very busy ear you have. Very
busy ear. And there has been huge anger across women in the Labour Party about what has happened, the handling of Lord Mandelson, the handling of Lord Doyle too. And in this meeting, we're told that Harriet Harman called for there to be a first Secretary of State and saying it needs to be a woman to oversee a complete culture change. That was backed by other female MPs too. Keir Starmer said he'd look into this. There was also a suggestion of tackling misogyny a sixth mission, which Keir Starmer said he wasn't sure whether it should be this or a new overarching thing.
So I think this is the biggest issue that's emerging today, the lack of a strong sort of female presence at the heart of government. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. But for now, Aggie, thank you very much indeed. Claire Ainsley, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, I said earlier on in the show that really this is a lot about Keir Starmer's temperament now. From what you know, we know that he's angry. I've seen that he's angry. I've heard that he's angry. But there must be a bit of a dark night of the soul about whether he really wants to carry on with a job that is trashing his reputation and must be so sort of miserable for the family as well.
You can see from the weekend's reaction that he was obviously deeply affected by all of the revelations around Epstein, Mandelson, the decision-making in the run-up. So I would not underestimate how much he will have reflected on that. And he is someone who also reflects on his own responsibility and thinks about that deeply. So I would have expected him to do that. I think it grieved him greatly. You've also seen him come out fighting on Monday, and I think his reaction to the statement that the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar made was very clear and decisive about his desire to continue. And I think he just feels like a massive sense of duty. I don't think it's about him necessarily as an individual. I think he knows that it was Keir Starmer as Labour leader who was elected, not anybody else. And I think he wants to see the job through.
He's clearly quite a proud man, I would suggest, as well, and he must hate a lot of what's being said about him. And the question is, I guess, in those situations, how do you remain both kind of invulnerable to the abuse that you get and at the same time open enough and curious enough about other people not to make the kind of mistakes he's made about Peter Mandelson and Matthew Doyle?
I think it's a great question because I think as a person, I think he is quite reflective. He's very Like, he's very robust. So, like, he's been criticised all the way through. There has not been a day of his leadership where somebody's not been, after him. So he's used to it in a big way. Also, his prior experience as Director of Public Prosecutions meant he had a security team with him all the time. He was subjected to quite a lot, given the criminals. So he's very robust. However, I think the point you make is really important about at which point do you not just bunker down and shut out the noise. And I think we're having one of those step change moments where the operation needs to expand and bring people in who are going to be able to give that line first to the parliamentary party, but also to the public.
Yeah. And very quickly, Claire, it's very important that the operation becomes, as it were, more female at this point. He's always struck me, maybe you disagree, as somebody who likes and is very comfortable with strong women around him.
Yeah, I mean, he had Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, Shabana Mahmood. He is very comfortable with strong women. I mean, they're all politicians of incredible caliber and strength. He also, in the staff operation, has always had a mixed team. Our leadership team was always half women, half men. He liked working with women. That was my sense of him, was that he liked people who stand up to him. He likes people who tell the truth to him. However, something has clearly broken down, particularly in the relationship with the women in Parliament. Yeah. And that needs to be rectified as a matter of urgency. I'm sure that's right. Claire Ainsley, thank you so much for that. Tense and angry scenes in the US Congress today, where the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has been under intense pressure from Democrats over the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein files. Called upon to apologise to Epstein survivors in the room, Bondi said she would not get into the gutter and do so. Let's talk now to LBC's Washington correspondent, Simon Marks. Simon, a fairly spectacular series of exchanges. Just tell us more.
Yes, absolutely combustible scenes on Capitol Hill, Andrew, and it's not now only Democrats that find themselves on the receiving end of the Attorney General's utter disdain for what is supposed to be a process of accountability that she is due to be cooperating with. She is instead stonewalling even Republicans who ask her questions that she deems hostile. She's been questioned by Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, a man who's considered a traitor and a turncoat by Donald Trump for pushing to get more information out from the Department of Justice about Jeffrey Epstein and the full release of all the documents that the Department of Justice still has in its possession. He wanted to know from the Attorney General why the most recent release had been botched, why so many of Epstein's victims say that their data was not properly redacted by the Department of Justice before that document dump was offered to the public. And Pam Bondi has not only refused to answer his question, but she has witheringly dismissed him as a failed politician. What we are witnessing here today, Andrew, is a collapse of the system of checks and balances that gives Congress the right to question Pam Bondi about what she is doing in one of the highest offices in the land.
A huge moment for American politics. Simon, thank you so much for that. Now then, the Brazilian documentary maker and filmmaker and screenwriter Petra Costa has issued a stark warning about the rise of far-right politics across South America, with states there beginning to adopt the kind of politics akin to Trump's MAGA White House. This is something that she explores in her new documentary Apocalypse in the Tropics, now nominated for a BAFTA. Well, Petra spoke with me, and she first explained why we in the UK should care at all about these political shifts in Brazil.
Well, Brazil is the fifth largest country in the world, the largest country in Latin America. It is the house of 20% of the world's oxygen through the Amazon forest. And the fate of Brazil will determine our fate as humans because of that. Who will be the president of Brazil, how he will deal with the deforestation of the Amazon will determine how we will survive as a species. But more than that, I feel Brazil has been a bit in the future of this far-right fever with Bolsonaro, what we call the Trump of the tropics, and also in the response to the far-right fever, the institutional response. While the United States was not able to punish Trump for assaulting democracy, Brazil was.
Yes, in a sense, some people listening who know a little bit about Brazil might think, well, we can relax about Brazil then. Bolsonaro got what was coming to him. The massive speed of the deforestation of the Amazon seems to have receded a little bit, so perhaps it's the time to relax and look elsewhere. You argue very differently, and part of your story is about the extraordinary and very, very fast rise of evangelical Christianity in Brazil. Just tell us more.
Precisely. Evangelical Christianity grew from 5 to 30% in Brazil in the last decades. Brazil is the greatest Christian nation in the world in terms of population. And what has happened with evangelical Christianity in Brazil is similar to what has happened in the United States, which is an allegiance to far-right ideology, a marriage, really, where you have 70% of the evangelical population in Brazil in recent years voting for the far right. In the United States, that's 80%. And they basically have been determining the last elections. We have elections in Brazil now in October.
And, a lot of people will think, well, nothing wrong with evangelical Christianity or Christianity generally. That might be a good thing. But you say this is a very specific kind of Christianity. What are the political issues that activate Brazilian evangelical Christians most?
Well, yes, of course, everyone's religion is a private matter. What is problematic in Brazil and in the United States is that you have evangelical leaders using the church as a political podium, using the faith as an instrument of manipulation, of political manipulation of their faithful, and even using it to coerce followers to vote for a certain candidate. In the last election in Brazil, one of the main evangelical churches, after the first round, summoned all their pastors for a meeting where they said that any pastor that said anything that could be considered progressive ideology would be expelled from the church.
And progressive means over gender and sexuality, race, and I guess around nationalism and patriotism.
Anything that could be considered in favor of the left, of the Workers' Party, who was the candidate of the left in that case. So not even moral issues, but also economic issues.
Right.
And we followed in our film a pastor who was precisely a victim of that persecution. He was expelled from his church for speaking against Bolsonaro.
But now we have Lula da Silva, and presumably a slightly different approach from the top of government, or has he been influenced by this rising evangelical tide as well?
Well, Lula, in 2002, when he was elected for the first time, he was elected thanks to an alliance with many evangelicals as well. And evangelicalism grew immensely during his time and his successor's time in government. Actually, 130% was the growth of the evangelical population during the Workers' Party government. Then they broke off with the Workers' Party and really aligned themselves with Bolsonaro to a point that to this moment is of no return. Most evangelical top leaders continued aligned with Bolsonaro, even though Bolsonaro is in prison. Lula has been courting, I believe, not the top leaders, which he feels betrayed by, but smaller pastors. But the allegiance of many followers to the top leaders is very strong.
Do you worry that what's going on in Brazil is going to spread across the rest of South America? In other words, this is, as it were, Trumpism or MAGA exported.
It's already happening. You see it with Milei, you see it in Chile, you see it growing already, both an expansion of churches that carry this kind of evangelical fundamentalist speech. Brazil exports today its evangelical churches to Latin America, Africa, and the United States, and also of the far-right speech embodied by Bolsonaro.
Well, here for an awful lot of people is an entirely new political boundary to examine and learn about. Petra, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
The kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie, mother of a famous television host in the US, has gripped that nation. We're going to talk about that next. But the time now, 6:49.
coming up at 7 on LBC. Ian LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:51. The kidnap of Nancy Guthrie, mother of the NBC television host Savannah Guthrie, has gripped America. What are some of the difficulties of dealing with an investigation this high profile? Let's put that to Michael Tapman, former FBI special agent and hostage negotiator. Michael, is the huge interest in this story making life harder for those investigating the kidnap?
In a sense, it's making it easier. Of course, whenever it's a high-profile case, the investigators feel a lot of pressure to get it resolved. And you can only go as fast as the evidence allows you to go. But in this case, the attention is going to help because they, being law enforcement, need the help of the public in identifying this individual. And there was enough information, enough specificity in that videotape, as we all say, that somebody knows who it is just by mannerisms, whatever little bit they can look in his eyes, his height, weight, general build. Someone knows who this is, and it's just a matter of time before we get that right tip and take this, identify this guy and take him into custody.
And we should explain, this is the video of the guy coming up to the door at the beginning of the kidnap. The fact that the elderly lady is the mother of somebody so famous, is that part of the story, do you think? In other words, is this part of an attempt to either influence the television station or extort money from somebody who can be assumed to be pretty wealthy herself?
Well, I have to tell you, we're kind of scratching our heads as to what the motivation is here. I don't believe that this person that we're seeing in the videotape is the same as those demands for ransom. I think those are all bogus, and I think if they haven't been dismissed, they will be. I don't know what the motivation clearly is here. Why would he kidnap an elderly woman who has health issues, who has mobility issues? It'd be so difficult. And then to what end? Again, I don't believe this individual sent ransom notes. If we look at how he approached this, he did all this preparation, covering his face and his hands, yet he got flustered by something as simple as a doorbell camera that everybody had. So, what great, criminal do we have here? I don't think he could have planned all that out. There's speculation maybe this was a burglary that went bad, and that's why I had all those tools in the backpack, and just something went wrong. But I don't believe that this guy came here with the intention to kidnap, somebody. I think something went bad, and unfortunately, I hate to bring the bad news. I don't think that Ms. Guthrie's alive, unfortunately, and I think this guy that we see, he is on the run now, destroying evidence and trying to get away because he knows that the FBI is on his tail.
A huge mystery, but perhaps a very grim one. Michael, thank you so much for that. Back now to the United States Epstein investigation, where the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has faced harsh criticism for the White House's decision not to investigate Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Philip Lacovera is the former Deputy Solicitor General of the United States and was counsel to the Watergate Special Prosecutor under Richard Nixon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. The pressure on Pam Bondi over Andrew is slightly puzzling, perhaps, because there are so many big American names in the frame, and yet the former Prince Andrew seems to have become a kind of lightning rod or a symbol of the Trump administration's willingness to push further on this investigation.
I think that's one of the things that's so puzzling about this. Prince Andrew has obtained a degree of prominence in the investigation that probably is well beyond what the typical American is concerned about. I think one of the reasons why there is so much a focus on the former prince is that he seems to have been rather clearly involved in some of the worst abuses by Jeffrey Epstein and his enabler, Ghislaine Maxwell. So while some of the information about other high-profile names is more sketchy, the information about the former prince is pretty spot on and undeniable.
This got very personal, very, very angry quite quickly between Pam Bondi and the congressman. Do you understand why that's the case? Do you understand why she is so touchy about this?
Well, she's feeling under a good deal of pressure, not only from Democrats, but also from the general public. There's a widespread view in the American population that the Epstein investigation has been mishandled, and the Pam Bondi a couple of months ago had said that she had on her desk a list of the people who were involved with Epstein. And when she was asked to turn that over, she said, well, I never really had a list. And that then led to legislation requiring that the Justice Department had to disclose all of its files, which has turned out to be millions of pages. And she has been the person who's the lightning rod for the bungling of this investigation into Epstein.
As I mentioned, you were involved in Watergate, which I guess is the American equivalent. We say this goes back, it's the biggest scandal since the Profumo affair of 1964, or whatever it was. And I guess
I even remember that.
Well, there you go. And Watergate's a bit the equivalent, I guess, in America. Where do you think this huge scandal is going to lead in the end?
I don't think anybody else is going to be indicted, which is the odd part of it. And that's one of the things that's been so frustrating to many observers and to the victims of Epstein's abuses, because he did not do this alone. There were apparently many other men who were taking advantage of the women that Epstein provided to them. And yet none of them has been subjected to any sort of prosecution or any other kind of consequences. And indeed, one of the things that Pam Bondi is being pushed on during these current hearings is that the Justice Department appears to have concealed the names of some of the people who were involved with Epstein and victims, while at the same time improperly disclosing the names and identities of some of the victims themselves. So it's an odd inversion of what should have been going on. The culprits should be exposed and the victims protected.
Odd and outrageous. Philip, thank you very much indeed for helping us. Thanks so much. And it's important to reiterate that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor denies all the allegations against him. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinion. Download that official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.